short break. But, so what happened? The Persian Empire stretches from Egypt to India, and Alexander marches through all of the Persian Empire with his army, claiming victory after victory and more area for his empire. So you may wonder, how exactly did Alexander manage to take these places, and how did he manage to keep them under control? So, and the answer to that is partly that he made an example of Thebes. So, pretty much as soon as Alexander took over the Macedonian kingdom, Greece tried to revolt, and so he set out to Greece to reestablish control there, used super harsh measures to make sure that the Greeks wouldn't rebel again. And when Thebes did, Alexander, with his army, crushed the Theban army, sold all the people into slavery, and burned the city to the ground. So he kind of made an example of Thebes to make sure that people knew he meant business when he was trying to get more cities into his empire. So, pretty much he marches through Persia, and within a year has all of it under his control. And then he leads them into Egypt and India. So, in 326 BC, when he crossed into India, this is the first time that his troops faced soldiers on war elephants. And if you've never seen them, it's absolutely crazy to see what these war elephants look like. So, let me see. So you have like people up on top of the elephants fighting each other. So they have a height advantage. They obviously have the advantage of the weight and sort of bulldozer effect of the elephants. So he never actually lost a battle anywhere that he conquered, but his soldiers were tired. It had been over a year, more than a year, since they had been home. They missed their families, they missed their home, they missed Macedonia, and they refused to go any further east. So Alexander agrees to turn back, freshen up the army, figure out a new plan, and come back and finish conquering India and China. But on the journey home, Alexander got a fever and fell really ill. And after a few days, he died. Age of 32 or 33, it's not quite sure. So after his rule, or after Alexander died, there were years of disorder. So his generals started to bicker about who was going to lead the empire. So finally, the empire was divided among the three of them, who actually ended up calling themselves kings. So Macedonia and Greece went to Antigonus, and the Persian Empire went to Seleucus, and finally Ptolemy ruled Egypt. And you may recognize the name Ptolemy as the lineage of Cleopatra VI, who is the famous Cleopatra that everybody loves to talk about. And we'll talk more about Cleopatra and the Ptolemies when we get into Rome, because that's actually more of the time period. Okay. So, Alexander is not just important because he conquered all of, or almost all of the Eastern world, but he's also important because of the legacy he left behind. Alexander's biggest achievement was his spreading of Greek culture throughout the Eastern world. So, he, brought a bunch of different kinds of people into his empire, and all of these new cultures blended together is what's known as Hellenistic, or which translates to Greek-like. So Alexander the Great founded a bunch of new cities. Most of them were named Alexandria. Very original, I know. He built Greek temples throughout the world, filled them with Greek statues, held Olympic-type contests, and he encouraged the local people to assimilate into Greek culture. But he also, made sure that they kind of kept some of their own cultures that he believed would keep them from rebelling. So you not only had local people assimilating into Greek culture, but you had the Greeks who were moving into these areas. They were also accepting local customs. They were settling in these areas. Alexander the Great actually married a Persian woman, and he urged his soldiers to do the same. I actually think that Alexander the Great had 2 Persian wives, but don't quote me on that. So like I said earlier, the new culture emerged, blended Greeks, it blended Persian, Egyptian, Indian influences. It's all known as Hellenism, and there's a specific sort of look that Hellenism has. So let's talk a little bit about that. Okay, so probably the most famous Alexandria that Alexander founded, he didn't actually found. So Alexandria, Egypt, was actually founded by Ptolemy and the other generals after his death. And so it's located between, kind of right smack in the middle of Europe and Asia, and was home to a bunch of markets that had all of goods from Greece, from the Middle East, from India, from Africa, from Persian Empire. So this was kind of like the center of the world, Alexandria was. And Greek architects designed Alexandria. So it was actually home to a lighthouse that was 300 to 400 feet tall. So pretty remarkable feat for its day and time. They had a museum as a center of learning. They had lecture halls, laboratories, zoos, and the Library of Alexandria. So most of you have probably at least heard of this. If you have ever seen if you ever seen National Treasure, at the end when they actually find the treasure, the woman says they're in the treasure room, she's pulling out stuff, and she's like, library or scrolls from the Library of Alexandria. So it was super important that she found those mythical scrolls in National Treasure, because all of the scrolls that represented the knowledge of the ancient world, so everything that people knew was pretty much in this library, was destroyed in a fire later on, which is just an awful loss of knowledge. Also, during the Hellenistic age, we have new roles for women coming out. So they're no longer restricted to their homes like they were early on. A lot of them learned to read and write, and royal women held a lot more power than they would have before. They worked alongside their husbands and sons, and some, like Cleopatra VII, actually ruled in their own right. Okay, so the Hellenistic buildings were much larger than those of classical Greece. So Hellenistic rulers wanted to make themselves seem godlike, and that's why they made their buildings so big. Alright, we have a couple of new philosophies. So we have one that's called Stoicism, and it urged people to just kind of calmly accept whatever life brings you. Don't get up in a tizzy about it. Just kind of go with the flow, be chill. They preached high moral standards, so they said that people should protect the rights of themselves and their fellow humans, and that everybody in society were morally equal, even though they were in different classes, because they all had the power of reason. And so this later influences Roman and Christian thinkers. Okay, just a couple of more philosophies. You don't have to write these down if you don't want to, but just for your information, there was another philosophy that was called Cynicism. And these students, they were called cynics, they rejected the idea of pleasure and wealth and social responsibility. And they believed that people should live according to nature. So they shouldn't have any of the material goods that humans sort of created for themselves. And so most cynics gave away all their possessions, they begged daily for their food, and they lived in public buildings. And then one more philosophy, the Epicureans, taught that sort of like on the other end of the scale of the cynics, they taught that people should seek out pleasure, and that pleasure equaled good, and pain equals evil. So that was kind of the way that people, if you were an Epicurean, sort of validated the things they did to make themselves feel good. Okay, so Hellenistic math and astronomy. In mathematics, we have Pythagoras, who we can all thank for that lovely thing called the Pythagorean theorem. He derives a formula that calculates the relationship with the right sides of a triangle. You all know that. And then Euclid sort of came up with the basis for modern geometry. We have Aristarchus, who argued that the Earth rotated on its axis, and it orbited the Sun. The heliocentric model that was accepted way later, so he was way before his time. We have Aristophanes, who showed that Earth was round and calculated the circumference like almost dead on in accuracy. It's amazing how accurate he was for his time period. And then science. So Archimedes, he applied physics for practical inventions. So he actually came up with the lever and pulley system, and he said, "Give me a lever long enough and a place to stand on, and I will move the world." Kind of to prove his point, what he did is he actually moved a ship on dry land using his lever and pulley system, which is sort of a feat in and of itself. And then the last one here in medical practice, Hippocrates studied the causes of illness, looked for cures, did some of the first study on human illness, and came up with the Hippocratic Oath, which is the oath that doctors have to take even today. First do no harm. I don't know the whole thing, sorry. Alright, so that is Greece. We're at the end finally. Hallelujah.